Let's make together the apron dress from Atelier Aida collection. Start by cutting the patterns from the fabric. Fold the fabric double by aligning the self edges of the fabric. Place the front panel at the center front on the fold and back panel just right next to it. And then start with cutting the pattern from the fabric. There are 2 darts on the front panel. Mark the dart on the both layer of the front panel. For the finishing, we need bias tape. On the leftover of your fabric, draw on a 90-degree corner, mark 15 cm on the each side, connect these 2 lines together and cut it off. Then trim off the self edge of the fabric. Now we have the first bias line of 45 degree. From that line, draw parallel lines. Each line should be 3.5 cm width. Please keep in mind the fabric still lies double. Draw approximately 8 to 10 lines. Now it's time to cut out the strips. To turn these short strips into a one long continuous piece, take 2 strips and place the right side of the fabric together at a 90-degree corner. Align the short ends so the corners overlap exactly. By this, you will create triangles of the excess fabric at either end. Continue pinning the rest of the strips together. Make sure the right side of the fabric facing each other. Now start to sew the 2 edges together at 0.6 mm seam allowance. Don't forget to backstitch at the beginning and the end. After sewing, when you open the strips, you will create a continuous piece. Continue sewing all the strips together. Press the seams open and cut off the small triangles at the both ends. Then use the bias tape maker of 18 mm. Slide the fabric through the bias maker. Good side of the fabric should face down. You can use awl or pin to help positioning the strip into the bias maker. Use the iron to press the strip that comes out. Iron the whole strip, and by this, now you will make the bias tape. Now it's time to sew the darts on the front panel. On the wrong side of the fabric, fold the triangles by aligning the lines and use pin to keep them folded. Start by sewing on the edge and stitch a diagonal line sharp to the end. Don't forget to backstitch at the beginning. Don't backstitch at the end. Cut the thread a bit longer and tie knots by hand. Repeat the same on the other side of the front panel. Then iron and press the dart. On the wrong side of the fabric, make sure darts folded toward the hem. Now it's time to prepare the pleats on the back panel. Mark the pleats on the back panel with a tailor chalk. There are 2 knife pleats on each back panel. As you can see on the pattern, there are two lines, one straight and the other one diagonal line. You must fold the straight line toward the diagonal line. By this, the pleats are wider on the waist and smaller on the hem, which will create an A-line silhouette. Fold the fabric on the straight line and press it. Now you have a nice crease line. Then fold these lines toward the diagonal line and press the fabric one more time. Repeat the same with the other pleat. Please note that the pleats are folding toward the center back on the right side of the fabric. Then repeat the same on the other side of the back panel. Pin the pleats on the waistline. Then secure the pleats on the waistline by stitching at 0.5 cm seam allowance. Now place the right side of the front and back panel together, aligning the side seam, and pin from waist all the way to the hem. If you have a light fabric, as we are using here in the video, you can sew the side seam of the front and back panel together and overlock or zigzag the edges together. But if your fabric is a bit thicker, first overlock the side seam and then sew them together. Start by sewing at 1 cm seam allowance. Don't forget to secure your stitches by sewing few stitches reverse. After sewing the side seam on the both sides, use the iron and press the seam open. If you use the thin fabric like us, now you can overlock the side seam of the front and back panel together. To finish the neckline, cut a piece of your bias tape. Place the right side of the bias tape to the wrong side of the neckline. Open the fold of the bias tape and align the edge of the bias tape with edge of the neckline. Pin in place. Start by sewing in the fold line of the bias tape, approximately 0.5 cm. Don't forget to backstitch at the beginning and at the end. Then press and iron the seam open to create a nice seam finishing. Then iron the seam allowance towards the bias tape. Then fold over the bias tape, cover the stitching line and press. Make sure to fold and pin the bias tape 1 mm over the previous stitch line. When you fold the bias tape exactly 1 mm over the previous stitch line, your pin falls exactly on the previous stitch line on the wrong side of the garment. Start by sewing right side of the fabric facing up on the bias tape at 1 mm distance from the fold. Don't forget to backstitch at the beginning and at the end. Fold the hemline of the front and back panel by creating a roll hem. Fold the hem twice 1 cm towards the wrong side of the fabric. Iron the folds on the hem to create a nice crease line. Sew the hemline as close as possible to the fold on the wrong side of the fabric. To finish the raw edges of the center back line, fold the center back line 1 cm towards the wrong side of the fabric and fold up one more time again. On the hem, fold the center back line over the hem. This creates a neat overlap where the hem and the opening meet. Place the fabric wrong side up under the sewing machine and sew along the center back line. Stitch at 1 mm distance from the fold. Repeat the same on the other side of the back panel. For the neat finishing, iron and press the stitch line. Now it's time to finish the open back and the waistline. Cut the bias tape that you made in half. For the proper fit and functionality, divide the length of the bias tape as follows. For the waist ties, leave approximately 70 cm extending from the waistline. Then start attaching the bias tape to the waistline. Place the bias tape, good side of the bias tape, facing the wrong side of the fabric. Open the fold on one side of the bias tape and align the raw edges together. Pin from the waist all the way to the side seam. Then sew in the fold line of the bias tape, sewing on the waistline from the center back all the way to the side seam. To create a neat corner, fold the bias tape at 45-degree angle. While holding this fold with your finger, bring the tape back to the new direction of the front back opening and align the raw edge of the front back opening with the raw edge of the bias tape. Keep the bias tape fold open. As you turn at the corner, a small fold will naturally form at the side seam. This fold allows the bias tape to change the direction. Keep the fold on the side and start pinning from the side seam all the way up to the neckline. Now again start sewing from the side seam, starting exactly from the previous stitches. Make sure to do not take the fold into the stitches. Stitch into the crease line of the bias tape. Continue stitching till you reach the neckline. Don't forget to backstitch at the beginning and at the end. So far we stitched the right side of the bias tape to the wrong side of the dress. Now press the bias tape over the seam allowance. Make sure the seam allowance lies under the bias tape. When you reach the fold on the side seam, make a nice and neat fold and press with iron. Tape the bias tape over the right side of the dress to hide the raw edge in the bias tape. Align the folded edge of the bias tape so that it extends approximately 1 mm beyond the previous stitch line. Make sure you fully cover the previous stitch line. Pin in place along the entire edge. At the side seam corner, where the pivot was made, keep the bias tape neatly folded. to form a clean and sharp corner. Ensure the fold lies flat and it is well positioned before you start sewing. The right position of the fold is continuous line of the side seam. If you have a thicker material or you feel like some places it's bulky, trim the seam allowance and reduce the bulk. For the strap extension at the waistline and the neck, fold the bias tape in on itself. Fold the strip in half lengthwise to create a clean and finished ties. Use a pin or clip to keep the fold. Cut the strip edge straight and fold at the beginning and the end of strap. Fold the raw edges inside to create a neat finishing. Top stitch along the bias tape approximately at 1 mm distance from the fold. Don't forget to backstitch at the beginning. Continue stitching along the full length, all the way from the waist strap to the waistline, front panel's back opening to the neckline, and all the way to the strap ties of the neck. Don't forget to backstitch at the end. Repeat the same on the other side of the garment, and then your dress is ready to be worn.